Hi, welcome to this, our fourth program in our Food Sensation series. I'm Rachel and this is Vanessa and we're from Food Bank. Today we're looking at how to make changes to recipes so that they're healthier and less expensive to make. We'll also be preparing a chili con carne recipe. But before we start, Vanessa's just going to tell you a little bit about Food Bank WA.
So Food Bank WA is a not-for-profit organisation which has operated since 1994. We have branches in Mandurah, Bunbury, Albany, Kalgoorlie, Boulder, Geraldton, as well as the main office in Perth. We are a link between the food industry and people in need. Community welfare agencies come to Food Bank to withdraw food at a small charge, and then that is given out to people in need. As well as working in food relief, Food Bank also has a number of other healthy lifestyle initiatives. One of those is Food Sensations. That is an interactive nutrition and cooking workshops which are held in schools as well as in community groups. We run sessions in not only primary schools as well as secondary schools, and we also have another program in the community which is our adult food literacy program, which works with parent groups, new migrants as well as Indigenous people. That is in conjunction with the Cancer Council and the Australian Red Cross.
So as I mentioned before, today we're looking at changes you can make to recipes to make them healthier and less expensive. In particular, we're going to be looking at ways to change them so they can help you with your weight, to make them more heart-friendly, to create a bit of variety at mealtime, and also to make them lower in cost. So the first lot of changes we're going to look at is ways that you can help with your weight. So the aim of these changes is to reduce the amount of energy or kilojoules in your meals. That's because weight management is all about energy in versus energy out. So the first of these is, wherever you can, to use reduced fat or sugar varieties of foods. Another thing you can try is, if you're sautéing, instead of doing it in oil, if you use a water or a stock, that just keeps the fat levels down a little bit. And also, if you're doing any frying, wherever you can, use a non-stick pan or just use a very light spray of cooking oil. That way you tend to use less fat than if you're just tipping oil into a pan and trying to move it around. But basically, any changes you can make in how you're cooking so that you're not adding as much fat or sugar to your food is a good way to help reduce the amount of energy in it.
Another way to help with your weight and aiming to reduce the energy content of the meal is actually using coconut flavoured evaporated milk instead of coconut cream or milk. That would actually reduce the energy content of the meal by quite a bit. Alternative sweeteners can also be used in cooking, and they can actually reduce the energy content as well. So using artificial sweeteners instead of sugar, but just be careful when adding it to hot food, as that can also make it a bit bitter. Also, when making pies and pastries and things like that, instead of using pastry on the bottom and the top, you can just use the pastry on the top. Also using mashed potato and breadcrumbs as well, that can actually reduce the fat content of a meal by only using a small amount of pastry or the potato or the breadcrumbs.
So another thing you can look at to make your meals a bit healthier is just try to keep an eye on the types of fats you use, just to make them a bit friendlier for your heart. So any changes where you reduce the saturated fat, which tends to be that animal fat, can be good, because these are the types of fat that can cause your cholesterol to go up, which isn't so good for your heart. And also any reductions you can make in salt can be good as well. Salt's been linked to high blood pressure, so any changes that you can make to your salt intake will also help with your heart health. So our first tip here is to use small amounts of poly or monounsaturated fats. So these are your plant oils like olive, canola, sunflower, soybean, all those sorts of things. So trying to use these instead of butter, which is one of those saturated fats. The other thing to try and do is to use smaller amounts of cheese. So try to use reduced fat cheese wherever you can. Or what you can also do is use an even smaller amount of a stronger flavoured cheese, such as Parmesan. It just depends on how you're going to be using it in your recipe, which way would be better. Leading on from using cheeses, if you've got a recipe that calls for a baked cheese topping, what you can actually do is halve the amount of cheese and then just use a mix of oats and breadcrumbs with it as well, just to reduce that cheese intake and that fat intake.
A lot of recipes require cream, and that's either in savoury or sweet dishes. So instead of cream for a dessert dish, you can actually use a reduced fat yogurt or a reduced fat ricotta cheese as well. That can actually reduce the amount of saturated fat in the dessert. Instead of cream in savoury dishes, try to use a low-fat evaporated milk or a low-fat natural yogurt or just plain milk, and that can make it lower in saturated fat. If it's a bit thin, you may need to make a little corn flour paste just with a couple of teaspoons of corn flour and a little bit of water, and that can actually be added to thicken up the savoury dish as well.
Another tip to make foods a bit more heart friendly is if you're doing your baking, you can often use margarine as an alternative to butter. So if your recipe is calling for you to cream butter, eggs and sugar together, you can actually use margarine instead. Or depending on the recipe, you might actually be able to substitute that butter for another type of oil as well. If you can, try to use tomato-based sauces with your pastas wherever you can instead of the creamy sauces. Obviously, lots more vegetables and again lower in fat. Wherever you can, try and reduce the amount of salt that you add during your cooking. So whether this is through using reduced salt products or by just not adding as much as you're actually cooking, that can be really good. And if you can, just try and not add so much salt at the table as well. So one of the things you can try is instead of using salts and stocks to flavour your foods is actually to use some herbs and spices. So have a bit of an experiment with what you've got in the cupboard or in the garden. If you do have access to the internet, there's actually quite a few good websites out there these days that give you food matches, so it sort of tells you what kind of spices and herbs go with which particular types of foods. So just have a search online and see what you can come up with and have a bit of fun in the kitchen.
Also, to make foods more low fat at meal times, it's important to create a variety at meal times. So instead of using margarine and mayonnaises and things on your bread, you can use a thin layer of avocado, hummus, cottage cheese, or try and get a lower fat mayonnaise. Also using different types of bread, so trying whole grain varieties of flatbread, rolls and things like that. Instead of using just plain white bread, try and have a variety of types of bread in the house. Also using noodles, rice or egg noodles instead of just plain rice for stir fries, that just adds a bit of variety as well instead of just plain rice. You can also use couscous instead of rice or potatoes with stews and curries, and that's another grain that can be used instead of plain rice or potatoes to actually improve the heart health of the meal.
So when you're looking at your meals and meal planning, it's always good to think of ways to try and save a bit of money. So one of the suggestions we'd like to say is try and make vegetables the base of your meals, not meat. If you look price per kilo, vegetables are often a lot cheaper than meat, so if you can make vegetables the main part of your meal, that will just bring the cost of the meal down altogether. So one way you might think about doing this is if you're having, say, a mince dish or stews or something like that, what you can actually do is halve the amount of meat and then replace it with either legumes or lentils. So things like your red kidney beans, a 4-bean mix, any of those sorts of beans can be great. The good thing about these is not only are they cheaper, but they're also a really good source of protein, but they're also lower in fat and higher in fibre. So not only cheaper, but a lot healthier for you as well. Another thing is wherever you can to just try and make things yourself as opposed to buying them in packets. So for example, making your own custard, so just using custard powder and reduced fat milk. This also has the advantage of you can control how much sugar's in there, which makes it a bit healthier. And another really simple thing you can do making yourself from scratch is things like chips or wedges. So if you think about the cost of fresh potatoes compared to buying deep fried chips or even oven fries, it's a lot cheaper to cook it from scratch using fresh potatoes, and it's also really easy as well.
Going on from making things at home, it's a good idea to make your cakes and muffins at home instead of buying varieties from the shops, because you can actually reduce the sugar by about half in most recipes, or use fruit or fruit juice to sweeten it as well. At least you know what you're putting in it. Also using half wholemeal and half white flour, that's another way to increase the fibre of the muffins or cakes. So just making sure when you're sifting the wholemeal flour that it will leave the husks in the sifter and just putting that back into the mixture. That will definitely increase the fibre of those cakes and biscuits and muffins, and you also know what you're putting in it, which is the most important thing.
So now we're going to put some of these ideas into practice and go through 2 popular recipes and just show you some swaps and adds that you can make to make them healthier and less expensive. So the first recipe we're going to look at is a creamy carbonara. As we said before, a tomato-based pasta sauce is ideal, but we can make a creamy one slightly healthier, so that's what we're going to do right now. So if we have a look at our recipe that we have here, so the original ingredients is some cheddar cheese, cream, eggs and butter, some wine, pasta, bacon and salt. So I'm just going to go through each of these ingredients and see what kind of swaps or if we need to take any of these out. So first of all, with the cheddar cheese, as we mentioned before, you've got a couple of options. If you're going to be still wanting to use a fair bit of cheese, it might be good to replace it with a reduced fat cheese. So we've just got an extra light tasty cheese. Or if you're only going to add a little bit of cheese in there, you might want to go for a Parmesan. Because it's a really strong flavoured cheese, you don't need to put heaps on there. With the cream, what you might want to do, as we said before, is replace it with some low-fat evaporated milk, just dropping that saturated fat down a bit more so it's a bit healthier for your heart. The eggs we'll probably just keep in there as they are. With the butter, what you might want to use is swap it with some margarine. Again, it's just those more heart-friendly fats in there. So it's just a bit healthier. The wine, probably keep the wine in. Can't really substitute it with anything, but obviously take it easy on the wine. Don't have too much for the cook. The pasta, you can actually get a wide range now of wholemeal pastas, so we might pop that in there just to increase the fibre content of the meal. And another reason is because people tend to have quite big serves of pasta, but if you have a wholemeal pasta, it tends to fill you up quicker, so it just helps keep that portion size down. The bacon, you've got a few choices. You could swap the bacon out altogether, or what we're suggesting here is maybe switching it to a leaner bacon. As you can see, there's not as much of the white fat in this shortcut bacon, but again, just trimming off as much as you can beforehand to get rid of as much of that saturated fat. And then finally we have the salt. So because you're getting a bit of salt from the cheese, you're getting a bit of salt from the bacon, we'd probably recommend that you could actually take that out altogether, because you probably don't need that because you're getting flavourings from the other parts of the other ingredients. So Vanessa's just going to talk about other things that you might want to add into this recipe as well.
Because as you can see, I guess there's not any vegetables in here, so we definitely want to add some veggies. So we're thinking you could probably add some spinach, so either frozen or fresh spinach, just for extra vitamins and minerals, as well as some peas that could be added in as well. So it'll give the pasta a bit of colour as adding in some extra fibre as well. Mushrooms are always a good addition to pasta. So you could definitely add, at least 3 vegetables to this pasta to make it a bit more healthier. And onion's another one that always goes well in pasta as well. So you could start off with sautéing some onion at the beginning. So whether you'd want a whole onion or half an onion, it's up to you. Also with the evaporated milk, sometimes when you use evaporated milk, the pasta might be a little bit runny. So it's a good idea to actually include maybe a little bit of a corn flour mix, so just a couple of teaspoons of corn flour, a little bit of milk to make a little paste, and then just add that in, and that will definitely thicken up the pasta. So you don't necessarily have to use the cream, you can still use the light evaporated milk and just add the corn flour to thicken it up a little bit.
So this is our modified creamy carbonara, so we've just made it a lot healthier with a lot lower saturated fats and adding these vegetables in. So now Vanessa's going to do the same sort of thing, but this time we're going to be looking at a curry.
Yep. So this is just a recipe renovation for a basic sort of curry. The ingredients we've got here are some rice, some diced steak or meat, curry powder, tomato paste, beef stock and coconut cream. So definitely starting with the rice, you could use a basmati rice, which has slower energy release, as well as a brown rice as well, which has increased fibre. So that's another option. When looking at the meat, we want to get a trimmed meat that has no visible fat on it. You can also go for the cheaper cuts of meat, like a gravy beef or something like that. So the recipe can be healthy in terms of the meat as well as cheaper. You can use a curry powder that comes in a little jar, otherwise you can go for using your own sort of spices to make your own curry paste or something like that. So whatever suits you, and depends how hot and spicy that you want it. We're looking at tomato paste, so you can use any sort of tomato paste, but try and get the salt reduced version because that has a lot less salt and that's better for your heart as well. And once again with the beef stock, so trying to get a salt reduced version in that as well. So whether you want to use the stock cubes or the liquid stock, that's up to you, but then try and get the actual low sodium or low salt version, which is quite important. And once again with the coconut cream, some curries require like a creamy sauce, so we go for the evaporated light milk, which is low in fat and still gives you that creamy consistency when making a curry. So in terms of using the coconut flavoured carnation milk, once again you can actually use the corn flour paste to make it a bit thicker, because sometimes using the evaporated milk it can be quite a thin consistency, so the corn flour actually helps to thicken it up to make it that creamy flavour that you're after. So Rachel's just going to add in some other vegetables and things to make the curry a lot healthier, so over to you.
Thanks. So as Vanessa said, you can use the coconut flavoured evaporated milk, but if that's not available, you can use just the plain one, but add a little bit of coconut essence in. So there are a few options around depending on what's available. So as Vanessa said, it's really good if you can to use a lean red meat. But again, to make it even healthier, as I mentioned before, what you can do is reduce the quantity of meat and then add some legumes or lentils in. So we're just going to add in some dried lentils. Particularly with a stew where it's going to be bubbling away for probably a couple of hours, the dried lentils can be a really good, cheap and easy option. If you like a bit of kick in your curry, you might want to add in some fresh chilies, depending on how brave you are and if they're available. And then in terms of vegetables, some vegetables that are really tasty in curries are things like capsicums. And again, it's just going to add a bit of colour to your dish as well. And then you might want to also think about something like zucchini and also some carrots. Over there. So with your vegetables, again, I think like we mentioned previously, if you can get lots of different colours, it's just going to increase the different types of nutrients that are going to be in there as well. So it not only makes it look a lot better, it just helps get you a wider range of vitamins and minerals, as well as making it tasty and healthy.
So basically any sort of recipe that you have, whether it's from a recipe book or given to you from a friend, you can actually renovate the recipe yourself. So just thinking about ways you can add in vegetables or reduce the fat content by changing butter to margarine, using evaporated milk as we've said instead of creams and things like that. So there's definitely always ways to add in vegetables to increase vitamins and minerals and fibre of the recipe as well. So just have a look next time, maybe you're making your favourite dish, of how you can actually make it a lot healthier for you and your family. So in summary, we're just going to give you top tips for healthier and cheaper meals. So firstly, we're just going to make sure you're reducing the amount of fat or oil wherever you can. So as we've said about the butter and cream and other high fat ingredients, where you can actually reduce those. And also making vegetables the base of your meals, not the meat. So with the curry, for instance, we put in quite a few vegetables at the end, still with the meat, but adding your lentils and things actually increases the amount of curry you make, as well as making it a lot healthier. And also having a vegetarian meal at least once a week.
This is good for a couple of reasons. One, because your vegetarian meals tend to be a lot less expensive than a meat-based meal, and also they can be a lot healthier as they tend to be lower in saturated fat and higher in fibre.
And as we said before, instead of using sugar when baking, you can actually use fruit or fruit juice. That would reduce the sugar content of whatever you're cooking at home there.
As we mentioned before, trying to lower the amount of saturated fat in your diet is a really good idea. So wherever you can, use margarines and oils instead of things like butter and lard. And leading on for that, trying to use reduced fat varieties of dairy products will also help reduce the energy and the saturated fat in your diet. To create more variety in your diet, try using wholemeal or whole grain varieties of breads and cereals. So using, as we mentioned before, flatbreads, buns, rolls, that kind of thing, it's a lot healthier for you, but again, just makes lunch boxes a bit more exciting. Also, wherever you can, try and make your meals from scratch instead of buying the pre-made packaged foods. Not only is this great because you can control what's in them to make them healthier, but they're also lower in cost.
Thanks, Rachel. We'll be back soon to cook a healthy chili con carne. We're back to cook the healthy version of chili con carne. So the recipe is available through your CRC, so you can either cook it along with us today or take it home and prepare it at home. So we've also got a variety of ingredients today. So we're using a number of canned ingredients. So we've got some corn kernels, red kidney beans, reduced salt, as well as some tinned tomatoes. In terms of fresh veg, we've got the onion and carrot, as well as a low-fat lean mince. We're also using some tomato paste, which is also reduced salt, and you can either use the fresh garlic or minced garlic, and some chili powder as well as some cumin. So also in that you can add other vegetables that you have at home, whether you want to use some frozen veg or other tinned vegetables, or add in some other zucchini and capsicum and things like that. So Rachel's going to just go through the equipment that you need today.
So like our previous recipes, you don't need a lot of complicated equipment for this recipe. So we've got a electric fry pan here today, but obviously just a normal fry pan on a stovetop is just as good. We've got a serving bowl, just a wooden spoon or a large spoon to stir it all through as you go. A nice sharp knife, a grater, we've got a teaspoon and a tablespoon measure, and some chopping boards. And that's all you need today to make your chili con carne. So just to go through those ingredients again that you'll need today. So we've got our canned vegetables, our red kidney beans, corn kernels and tomatoes, some fresh carrot and onion, some nice lean beef mince, or you can use any other mince you might have around. We've got our reduced salt tomato paste and minced garlic, and then we've got our chili powder and ground up cumin seeds.
Okay, so just following your recipe, it's really important to make sure you wash your hands before you cook. So Rachel and I have already done that. And also being aware of knife safety as well. So if you've got any small children around, keeping knives out of harm's way, as well as when you're using the electric frying pan or the stove, just making sure that they're out of reach from young hands as well. So we're just going to also chop up the onion and the garlic today, and that's the first step to making the chili con carne.
So while Vanessa's doing that, I'm just going to start grating up the carrot that we'll be using later on as well.
That's for you.
So as Vanessa said before, you can put in lots of different vegetables.
Can I just grab that now? Excuse me.
So just whatever you've got around the house, you might want to chuck in there. So as I think Vanessa said, you could put in some grated zucchini. If you've got some capsicum, that's really good in something like this. If you don't have kidney beans in the cupboard, you can use pretty much any other kind of canned beans as well. So there's a lot of variety you can have with this recipe.
We should have pre-peeled this onion.
So what we're actually going to be doing is when we're going to cook up the onion and the mince at the same time. That way we don't actually have to add any extra fat into the pan, because even though we've got a lean mince, it does still have a bit of fat in there, so that'll be enough in the pan for the onion to cook through.
I was just going to also say, when I'm dicing the onion, so a good way to dice an onion is to actually follow the lines on the onion. So if you follow the lines sort of straight through and then cut through the other way, that's a good way to dice the onion, and you always remember because the lines are there that you follow, and keeping your fingers out the way.
If for some reason you haven't got access to a nice lean mince, what it can be good to do actually is to cook off the mince on its own before you add any of the other ingredients in, and then you can just drain off any of the fat that comes out of the mince before you pop in your onions or your garlic or whatever else you're putting with your mince that day.
So I've just got to bring up the frying pan and plug it in. Let's move that out of the way. Okay, that's good. Yep. So just add the onion to the pan, and also a tablespoon of garlic.
I'll do that.
Yep. And just stir around with a wooden spoon until the onion's nice and brown. Okay, so Rachel's just browning off the onion and the garlic. So probably at this stage it's about adding the mince in. And all we have to do now is just make sure that mince is nice and brown and cooked through. So that'll probably take about 4 or 5 minutes. And then it's about adding in the beans and the corn and the tomatoes. So we're just going to let that cook for a few minutes. So Rachel's browned up this mince nicely with the onions and the garlic. So what we do now is just add in the spices. So I've just poured into the bowl here a teaspoon of the cumin powder as well as a teaspoon of the chilli. So that's just going to go in on top of the mince there, and Rachel's just going to give it a good stir. So just stir that for, about a minute or so it's nicely mixed in. And then we've drained off the red kidney beans and we're just going to add those in as well. Just going to tip that in.
If you can, it's really good to be able to give those kidney beans a good rinse under some cold water as well, just to get rid of any of that extra brine that they've been canned in.
Yep, so we're just going to add in the corn kernels as well.
So as you can see, the corn just gives it a really nice colour, just makes it look a little bit more exciting.
And then the tomatoes, so just a tin of diced tomatoes. And then also a tablespoon of the tomato paste. There we go. So you're just going to stir that in for a few minutes till it's nice and mixed through and heated up as well.
So we're just going to keep stirring through these vegetables and heating them up until they're nicely warmed through.
But Rachel, we have forgotten something.
Carrots.
The first carrot that you grated.
So we'll just pop that in there as well.
All right, give that a mix through.
This is all nicely heated through now and it's ready to serve.
We made this chili con carne quite quickly, so really only takes possibly up to 10 minutes to cook. The ingredients we used were the red kidney beans, the corn kernels, the diced tomato, as well as the onion and a carrot. We also used mince, tomato paste and some garlic, as well as a couple of spices with the cumin seeds and also the chili powder. So while Rachel's just popping that in a bowl, you can serve that with some couscous or some rice, depending what you like, or just a bit of variety using the couscous for a change. Or you can actually wrap it in some wholemeal wraps with some salad. That's another good, easy dinner as well.
So here we have it, our healthy, cheap, tasty chili con carne.
So for this dish, you could feed a family of 4 for less than $15. So just using the mince and the veggies that we've talked about, and if you wanted to add the couscous or make it in a wrap with salad, so it could easily be less than $15. So that's a really cheap, quick, healthy meal for a family of 4.
As per usual, if you want some more details on what we've been talking about today, feel free to contact Food Bank. Our phone number is 08 92 58 9277. Or you can email the Healthy Food for All team at info@healthyfoodforall.com.au or visit our website www.healthyfoodforall.com.au where there's a few recipe ideas as well as what we've been up to recently.
And if you have any queries or further suggestions, you can also contact Westlink at westlink@rdl.wa.gov.au. And our next program is on Thursday the 20th of June. And the topic of that session will be more than cereal and toast. So basically giving you new breakfast ideas.
We'd also just like to acknowledge our funders and supporters at Healthy Food for All. Our major funders are the State Government Department of Health, Department of Education and Department of Regional Development and Lands, Royalties for Regions, Telethon and BHP Billiton.
And our supporters are Harvey Fresh, the Perth Mint, Shore Barge, Kraft Foods, West Coast Eagles and Market City.
So thanks again for joining us today and we'll see you next time.